Elizabeth I is remembered as one of England's greatest monarchs. The English didn't believe a woman could rule alone, but Elizabeth rewrote the narrative. She solidified England as a Protestant country, defeated the Spanish Armada, and promoted the arts. But she had a very difficult childhood and was fortunate to make it to the throne at all. When she was young, her father Henry VIII executed her mother. She was stripped of her inheritance and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. Elizabeth, daughter of the mercurial King Henry VIII and his second wife Anne Boleyn. Henry married Anne Boleyn out of pure love. He hoped that his beloved woman would give birth to his long-awaited sons. From his previous marriage with Catherine of Aragon, he already had a daughter, Princess Mary. However, Henry's hope of a son with Anne was short-lived. To his bitter disappointment, Anne Boleyn gave birth to a daughter, Princess Elizabeth, in September of 1533. The king had been so confident it would be a boy that the word "prince" on the official announcement had to be hastily amended to "princess." King Henry VIII was angry and saddened by the birth of his daughter. He was desperate for a male heir to continue the Tudor dynasty. Nevertheless, Elizabeth was given a lavish christening, but her father, King Henry, did not attend. She was christened in the chapel of the Observant Friars. Her godfather was Thomas Cranmer, and her godmother was the Duchess of Norfolk. Following the christening, Elizabeth was sent to live at Hatfield when she was only 3 months old. It was the little princess's own private household managed by a staff of nurses, courtiers and tutors. Only on a few occasions did Anne Boleyn visit her daughter. Elizabeth was still only 2 years old when her mother was accused of adultery and beheaded on the orders of her father Henry VIII. Anne Boleyn's fate meant that the little girl was no longer a princess, declared illegitimate and removed from the royal succession. Her childhood was spent in eternal fear of a cruel father, and more than once she awaited a terrible fate with a sinking heart. Lady Bryan did her level best to protect Elizabeth from the terrible events that had befallen her mother. Her father was wrapped up in his marriage to Jane Seymour, who gave birth to the much-awaited son and heir for King Henry. At this point Elizabeth suffered with some neglect, and Elizabeth's governess Lady Bryan was forced to write to Secretary Thomas Cromwell, stating that Elizabeth was outgrowing her infant clothes, and there was no household money to properly clothe her, and no direction on her upbringing. Fortunate enough, Jane turned out to be a caring woman. She provided the girl with basic needs, and she also wanted to reconcile her husband with her daughter, but the king was adamant. At this point, Elizabeth still lived at Hatfield House. Only occasionally did she visit the royal residence. Elizabeth was considered illegitimate, but this fact did not prevent her from having a good education. She excelled, learning at least 5 languages under the expert guidance of humanist scholars like Roger Ascham and John Chake. Ascham later reported in 1548 that her mind is no womanly weakness and her perseverance is equal to that of a man. Regrettably, 2 weeks after giving birth Jane died. Henry soon after married Anne of Cleves, who he divorced just after 3 weeks. Shortly after, Henry married his 5th wife, Catherine Howard. The fate of Anne Boleyn awaited her. This execution made a very strong impression on the 9-year-old Elizabeth. Probably, the frightened little girl formed a bad opinion of marriage. She would never get married, and she was called the Virgin Queen. Later on, Henry married Catherine Parr, who became the king's 6th wife. Catherine had a good friendly relations with her stepdaughter for many years. Subsequently, Catherine encouraged King Henry to sort a more permanent reconciliation with his daughter. She was once again included in the line of succession, and she was brought back at the royal residence. The young woman with her father's red hair and her mother's dark eyes was a remarkable presence at court. Catherine Parr seems to have exerted a strong and positive influence over Elizabeth at this critical period of her life. The Queen encouraged Elizabeth's learning and taught her about Protestant Reformation. Even after Henry's death in 1547, this happy and fruitful period of Elizabeth's life continued. She was welcomed into Catherine's home at Sudeley Castle, with her new husband Thomas Seymour, when Elizabeth was caught in a close embrace with Catherine's husband. She was banished from the house. As a result, she went back to the Cheshunt estate in Hertfordshire. There the young princess continued her studies with Roger Isham, who truly possessed encyclopedic knowledge. In the future, Elizabeth was grateful to him and idolized him all her life. In 1548 Catherine died in childbirth, and Seymour was subsequently executed for plotting to marry Elizabeth and kidnap Edward VI. Edward, suspicious of his sister's involvement, sought answers. Elizabeth was less than forthcoming, admitting only that she knew of Seymour's ambition, but that she had never encouraged him. Sir Robert Tyrwhitt, charged with Elizabeth's questioning, reported, "I do see it in her face that she is guilty." The young princess soon learned to mask her true feelings if she was to survive the tempestuous politics of Tudor England. After a series of tragic events, in 1551, the rightful heir Edward VI ascended to the throne, with whom Elizabeth was friendly. He invited her to return to court. On July 6, 1553, Elizabeth was shocked by the news of her brother's death. After Edward's early death in 1553, the two sisters rode into London together to celebrate Mary's coronation. But the show of togetherness did not last long. Mary's controversial plans to marry Philip II of Spain, and to return England to the Roman Catholic Church caused serious concern. Elizabeth became the focus for treasonable plots against her sister. Thomas Wyatt's rebellion of 1554 implicated Elizabeth directly. He organized unrest in Kent. His goal was to prevent the marriage of Mary and Philip. But probably he was still trying to overthrow the Queen and put Elizabeth on the throne. The captured rebels did not give any evidence against the Princess Elizabeth. Queen Mary I wanted to execute her sister, but by the decision of the Privy Council she was spared. But she was imprisoned in the Tower of London. Elizabeth's imprisonment at the Tower of London was comfortable enough physically. However, this was where her mother had spent her last days before her execution. Meanwhile, discontent with Mary's rule was growing in England. People didn't like her politics, especially her marriage to Philip of Spain, a representative of the Habsburg family, bothered them. The marriage to the Spanish king produced no children, and Philip, bored with his wife, spent just little time in England and left the Bloody Mary. Childless and grief-stricken by 1558, Mary's health deteriorated significantly. Queen Mary's advisors insisted that she should name her sister as her successor, but Bloody Mary was categorically against it. She understood that the country would return to Protestantism. As soon as she felt an imminent death, she succumbed to persuasion and left the crown to her half-sister Elizabeth. 3 days after Mary's death, Elizabeth gathered the First Council. On it, she made speeches of gratitude to everyone who took part in her life and helped her during the disgrace. She offered Thomas Perry the position of treasurer, her childhood friend Robert Dudley became her equerry, and William Cecil was appointed her secretary. And in November of 1558, Elizabeth, who was 25 years, was greeted by an enthusiastic London. Elizabeth ruled England for 45 years, and her 45-year reign is also considered the Golden Age of England, an era of peace and prosperity. As the last Tudor monarch, she managed to raise Britain to a major world superpower in every respect.